What a game. Lived up to the hype. The Philadelphia Eagles somehow take down the Kansas City Chiefs. We will dive into everything from Jalen Hurts to Mahomes to the drops to the tush push. That was awesome. I don't know what else to say. I live for games. Ugly, rainy, though I hate the cold and I don't like getting wet in the cold. Watching football in the confines of my home like that's hard, that one touchdown in the second half is going to swing the game. Sign me up. We'll dive into some other things around the NFL as well. But as you guys know, new to the channel, just started this 3 and Out channel. Make sure you subscribe. All of our content. We will have a podcast today. We'll have another one tomorrow. We'll have one after the 49ers Seattle game on Thursday night. Content's going to be flowing here during the holiday seasons. No slowing down here. So make sure you subscribe. Same thing with the audio podcast. You like listening to your podcast? We got you covered. Apple, Spotify. Make sure you go subscribe 3 and Out with me. Thevolume.com. We got merch. Thevolume.com. Search. We got 3 and Out merch. Before we dive into, that was I don't know if it was my favorite game of the year, but the intensity, what was on the line, I was probably on the most edge of my seat. Maybe that Eagles-Cowboy game. Both those two games. Ironically, the Eagles were part of them both. That was fun. But before, do you ever want to go to a game like that? Do you live in one of these towns that are hosting some of these big football games, college or pro, coming down the home stretch for college, right? Do you want to go to a big college football bowl game, maybe the playoffs, the NBA, college basketball, concerts, comedy shows? Well, here's what you do. You go to your app store, you download the Gametime app. And you sign up for a pair of tickets, any pair of tickets to any event, and use the promo code JOHN, 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 and get $20 off your first pair of tickets. It's very, very easy to do. I recommend it to anyone, and a lot of you guys that have used it told me to go to games. I'm glad. Hopefully you had fun, and I'm glad you saved $20. So download the Gametime app, the official ticketing app of this podcast, promo code JOHN, $20 off. Do it now. You know what's funny is when I watch games and my mom, we got family in town for Thanksgiving, I'm constantly thinking of what my angle is going to be, especially these instant reactions, what we're going to talk about when it comes to what we just witnessed on Monday Night Football, on Thursday Night Football, on Sunday Night Football. And when I felt pretty confident, Jalen was playing pretty shitty. It's like, God, the Chiefs were up, I think, 17-7. Like, Chiefs, do you know who they remind me of? Is like that stretch in The Last Dance, right? Like the 97-98 Bulls. They weren't quite as sexy as the early run in the early 90s. Michael Jordan, Scotty weren't quite as athletic, but they still had Michael Jordan, just like the Chiefs still had Mahomes. They had Phil. They got Andy. But it was just a little grimier. It was just a little tougher, but they were still always going to win. The Patriots, they kind of morphed the opposite way. The 07 team and that kind of run with Randy Moss and Wes Welker was incredible to watch offensively, but they didn't have the same defenses that they had in 01 and 03 and 04, so it would kind of be like backtracking. Well, this Chiefs team, I was like, they're kind of like the late 90s Bulls. And then somehow Jalen, and this is why and how you become an elite player, right? It's what they talk about in baseball with elite pitchers, like a guy like Pedro Martinez or Roy Halladay or, whoever the top pitchers are now. A lot of them go like 5 innings, so it's hard for me to keep track. But when you don't have your A stuff, can you still find a way, at least in my day, to go 7 innings and give your team a chance? And tonight you're watching that game. It's ugly. Every first down is contested. The game was so physical. I mean, there are a ton of premium players all over the field. It's awesome. That's why I watch football. I love, east of where I live, this is not USC, UCLA. This is not Rams versus Colts in a dome. Outdoor, it's cold as shit. It's raining. It's hard to catch. It's going to be very, very difficult. I don't care if you got Jalen Hurts and Patrick Mahomes or you got Devito and Zach Wilson. It was going to be difficult. And then Jalen, who I thought was playing really, really poorly, finds a way, scores on a rushing touchdown. Then they get the ball. I think it was off the Travis Kelce fumble. They bust a big DeAndre Swift play, who he's been fantastic for the Eagles. They hit Devontae Smith down the sideline. He throws a beautiful deep ball. That's the thing. When Jalen is off, at any moment, he can have a big run with his legs, a big play with his legs, whether it's to gain a first down or whether it's to score a touchdown. And he also is an explosive passer. So even if it's not looking great in the short and intermediate game, and a lot of times throughout this season, it does not look good. You're like, God, the Jalen that we saw last year, who's probably going to win the MVP, it just doesn't quite look the same. And then a moment's notice, bomb down the sideline, former Heisman Trophy winner Devontae Smith, tush push, touchdown, they take the lead. And they never relinquish it. And clearly the Chiefs, who aren't really built at this time, you get in some of these comeback situations, especially in a game like tonight where it's raining. I mean, that stat, they dropped it early in the game that the Chiefs lead the league in drops. You're like, yeah, it kind of feels like that. And once they said that in the first or second quarter, I swear to God, there were 10 drops throughout the game after that point. But this is a game that, I mean, these are easily two of the best teams in the league. We all know that coming in. But, it basically came down to who could make a big play in the passing game. Jalen Hurts did, and Patrick Mahomes also did, except his wide receiver dropped it. And right now, the difference between those two teams, and I would say I think the Chiefs' defense is better. The Eagles' offense is clearly more explosive. And while the Eagles' defense is not as complete, because I don't think their secondary is as good as the Chiefs' secondary, their defensive line is dominant. And at any moment, multiple guys can be all over your ass in the backfield. But like I said, Jalen Hurts completes the big pass to Devontae Smith. When Patrick Mahomes did it, his guy drops it. But he's not throwing it to Tyreek anymore. Because if that was Tyreek Hill, now part of the reason they're really good and a much more of a complete team is because they made that trade. And McDuffie, who was all over the place tonight, had some big-time plays. They got him because they traded Tyreek Hill. So you couldn't have them both, but like that used to be him. And he walked in to score. Instead, now it's Valdez-Scantling. And he literally hits him in the hands, and it drops to the ground. So, listen, the Eagles, to come in that environment, to have your quarterback not playing well, to be losing, it felt like the majority of the game, and find a way to win, kind of symbolizes their entire season. They are not showing up, and it feels like you're just watching their A game. Yet when the clock hits 0-0, they have more points than the other team. You're like, how the hell did they just pull that off? And part of it is they have a lot of premium players at a lot of different positions, basically every position that matters. And one thing right now the Chiefs clearly lack. Now, ultimately, I think they can overcome it because in the AFC, with all the quarterback injuries, who do they really have to beat? Right? I mean, really, it's the Ravens. And I guess the Browns, but the Browns are going to score on them? No chance. So, they can win that game like 10-3. I think the Chiefs can still win the AFC, but you can see when they play some of these NFC teams, they don't play the 49ers, but the 49ers and the Eagles just have a little more firepower than them. And in these tight games, when, 24, 25 points is going to determine the outcome, it can be difficult for the Chiefs to get to that number. You felt it today. Now, I understand it was pouring rain, but beside Kelsey, it's kind of a work in progress. Andy Reid, several times tonight, the Andy Reid I know and love, passes it on all downs. But Pacheco's clearly a second-best offensive player, skill guy behind Travis Kelce. Runs it a lot on first down. I don't blame him. I would too. You just don't have as much faith in these guys, which ultimately might not be their downfall in the AFC. But I think you watch this team and you go, God, they would have to play. Now, where's the game? The Super Bowl. It's in a dome. So the weather means nothing. But whether they get home field, which it's going to be difficult. The Ravens still have a tough game. So do the Chiefs. Who knows? I would say it's probably a coin flip between those two teams to get the home field advantage. But the games are going to be outdoors, right? Whether it's in Kansas City or Baltimore. So it's just going to be difficult for these wide receivers to make plays. And just enormous win by the Eagles. Let me say one thing. Sirianni seems like a good guy. Be a fun guy to bullshit, talk ball with, have some beers with. And the one thing I respect the most about the Eagles, their highest paid player is just a serious cat. Jalen is not some big, fist pumper, shit talker. He's just he's like Belichick or Andy. There's no ups and downs. You never see the emotion, right? We've all seen that meme over the years of like national championship, when he's benched, when he throws the game-winning touchdown. His reactions are always the same. the douchey Sirianni, after one, anytime there's a PBU, he acts like he was Deion Sanders on the play. It's like, Nick, you're in like 7 layers. You're not calling the offense or the defense. You're just, motioning timeout a couple times a game. Let's tone it down a little bit, buddy. And then after the game, him like running around the field, motioning at the fans. Come on, bro. Like that's douchey behavior. I've supported him before, but I thought tonight you're playing the defending champs. It's a big boy game. If you want to do it against the Commanders and the Giants and the Cowboys, let's just fucking act like you've been there before. You literally just were in the Super Bowl against these guys with a late lead. That to me, I want to like the guy, and I have liked him. I don't know him personally, but that's kind of fucking loser behavior. Let's just call a spade a spade. I don't expect you to act like Andy Reid 24/7, but let's just come on, bro. Come on, man. Other than that, I don't. The Eagles, man, they're pretty complete. I mean, they can, like we said, they can have their C game and find a way. The thing with the Chiefs, but those drops are real. I mean, balls are going through guys' hands. Kelsey has a drop. To me, he's separate from everyone else. He's allowed to have a bad drop. Steph Curry can miss a 3. But some of these other guys, how are you going to depend on Valdez-Scantling? And clearly they don't have a choice. So that is a little concerning at the highest levels when they're going to play the Ravens. If they get to the Super Bowl against the Eagles or the 49ers, the margin is just much smaller for this team, though they are built. And overall, like I said, you signed me up for a game in that weather, that intensity. I'll watch that 24/7, 365. You can have your, multiple quarterbacks throwing for 700 yards each, 5 touchdowns. Like, you take that 7-on-7 BS somewhere else. Throw me back to the 90s and 80s every once in a while and give me a game that's just grimy, ugly. Every penalty, people are freaking out because it really matters. The Fletcher Cox penalty late. Listen, I come from a school, like, I wish that shit was still allowed to fly, but it's not anymore. So that is a penalty. I hate it. I'm sure many people listening hate it, but these are the rules. I mean, these are kind of the rules we play by. I think Tom Brady went on Stephen A's podcast. It's got to be quite the listen. And he had a great point. He's like, I don't understand how an offensive player can be defenseless. Like, it's not on them to defend themselves or defenders to defend themselves from the offensive players. Like, it's on them, an offensive player going over the middle to protect himself. But the rules, like, they have changed. Football has changed. And it's not just because they think it's cool to do it. It's all based on litigation, CTE, concussions. Like, this is all about money. When all else fails in society, whether it's sports, whether it's politics, anything, business, it goes back to the money. So these rules have all been dictated by the lawsuits years ago. Not as fun to watch for us purists, but it is what it is. And you got to be careful around the quarterback, especially. People are like tweeting me, it's the golden boy. Yeah, it is the golden boy. It's fucking Patrick Mahomes. Multiple MVPs, multiple Super Bowls. Like, this is their new star. This is the new Favre. This is the new Peyton Manning. This is the new guy that sells for the league. You put him on, you get 30 million people on couches. So yeah, they're going to protect him. But that flag is thrown against, if it's reversed, against Jalen Hurts, if it's Dak Prescott, if it's Brock Purdy, if it's Jared Goff, like that flag's getting thrown. And, God, Fletcher Cox for an old guy, still pretty powerful. But what a game. What a win by the Eagles. That's a hard loss for Kansas City, man. It's one thing to lose. Another thing, when you have the lead the majority of the game, you're at home. For them to come back like that, the way they won it, that lived up to the hype. There's so much to be thankful for. Family, friends, food, and the NFL all week long. DraftKings Sportsbook is keeping your Thanksgiving week full of action. New customers can bet just $5 on the NFL action to score $150 instantly in bonus bets. No matter your appetite, there's something for you. Money lines, parlays, props, live bets, and so much more. You name it, they got it. So download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use the code JOHN. New customers can bet $5 on the NFL Thanksgiving action to score $150 instantly in bonus bets. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. With code JOHN, the crown is yours. I wanted to go around the league a little bit, and I thought the way I would do this is a little good, bad, and ugly. We'll just kind of go through some positives, some bad, and then the really ugly in the NFL. To some of the stuff that me and Colin at Sunday before the Sunday night game that we didn't get a chance to go over. Obviously, the Sunday night game, I mean, you talk about good. Listen, when you give up, let's put it, say it like this. You score 20 points. If you're just an NFL team and you score 20 points, I'm like, you lost by a lot. You're like, God, we gave up 40 points. Like we lost 40-20. Like that's an ass kick. If I tell you scored 20 points and you lose by 50, and this is the National Football League, not college, not the pros, you would never believe me. You no chance you would ever believe me. So when the Denver Broncos lost 70-20, it's hard to take you seriously, at least for the next month after that. So it wasn't just, kicking a guy when he's down. It's easy to make fun of Brandon Staley now. Those of us that have been talking about it for 3 years are kind of exhausted by it. It's like, yeah, I'm tired of this topic. Can we move on? Just fire the guy already. I've been talking about this since like 2021. But when you give up 70 points, and you score 20, so you live by 50, I just couldn't take you seriously. And then they win the game last night, and you look up, you're like, the Denver Broncos are 5-5? They're 5-5? You got to give the guy some credit, right? Sean Payton, who I thought was kind of losing his touch, was into all this weird shit, like making guys not wear sunglasses on the sideline and no sweats or whatever his rules were, no backwards hats. It was just in the preseason about all this weird shit. And then the way the season started, and then Vance Joseph was defensive coordinator. And now you look up, they just look like a credible NFL team. I wouldn't bet on them necessarily making the playoffs, but by any means, I would not have picked them. Hell, I would have picked the Minnesota Vikings last night. If I bet on that game, I would have bet on the Vikings. Would have felt pretty good about it going through. Now, did they get a little lucky with Russell Wilson kind of pulling a play out of his ass? Yeah. But part of Russell Wilson, where we're like, where is that guy? That's what he used to do in Seattle. So that play when he throws up to Sutton, like, that's a little throwback Russ. Throwback Russ is a guy that would make plays. You're like, that was kind of lucky, but he'd just do it over and over. He's clearly not as dynamic as he was like in the peak of his powers, but he is dramatically better than he was last year. And I would say, definitely much improved from where he was early on in the season. Like, it's kind of working. Little dink and dunk aspect to him. They're playing better defense. So Sean Payton, the last several weeks, has been really, really good. Like this, listen, I like Nick Wright. I think he cares a lot about sports, watches all the games, which a lot of people in this business, I definitely don't believe do. They just kind of throw shit at the wall, have takes, get some paid, whatever. But he had a take last week that I saw come across my timeline where everyone on set, like Chris Broussard, I don't think it was Greg. It might have been Greg Jennings and Kevin Wildes, and all the guys on set were just, their jaw hit the floor. They were beyond taken back. They were speechless because he said if you flip-flop Baker Mayfield and Brock Purdy, that the 49ers would basically be even better and they would, could easily win the Super Bowl, and the Buccaneers would be awful. And my issue with that take was, in a vacuum, Brock Purdy's a much better player in 2023 than Baker Mayfield. And you watch that game against the Bucs. Like, the Bucs actually have some pretty good players. Mike Evans still pretty good. Devin White's still pretty good. Vita Vea's really good. Christian Wirf's really good. Like, they got dudes. They got some players. They got a ton of players that the Cowboys, the Eagles, the Niners, the Chiefs would gladly take and start immediately. Brock Purdy is in a different universe than Baker. But I'm not going to spend much time talking about that because you all are going to agree with me. Here's the reality with Brock Purdy. If we want to argue about him, if you start comparing him to Mahomes or like Lamar Jackson or Tom Brady or Peyton Manning, it's a pointless exercise. The dude started 16 or 17 games in his career. But right now, this version of Brock Purdy is a really good player. Like, really good. And relative to what the 49ers won a lot of games with in Jimmy Garoppolo, who was kind of the definition of average. If he had a good game, he'd be like the 11th best quarterback. When he had a bad game, he'd be like the 18th best quarterback. But he kind of lived in that middle ground, somewhere between like 12 and 17. And their defense was really good, and Kyle was good, and they could find ways to win, double-digit games and make playoff runs. This guy's a real quarterback. Now, where he ranks, I don't know. The way he's played the last 2 weeks, he's played like a top 7 or 8 quarterback in the NFL. He's a borderline Pro Bowler right now in the NFC. Right? There's a big four in the NFC right now. Jalen, Dak, him, and Jared Goff. And I'm talking about not the fake Pro Bowl when a guy goes Super Bowl, another guy goes play golf, and they all tap out, and all of a sudden you look up and it's like Mac Jones is in the Pro Bowl. I'm talking the best 3 guys in your conference go to the Pro Bowl. He has a very good argument for that. And he's going to play in some big-time games coming up. He's got Seattle Thursday night. Everyone in the country is going to be watching. You're either going to not be able to move, coma on your couch if you live on the East Coast, or maybe eating dinner right at the dinner table with the game on the background. Everyone's going to be watching. You know who he plays the following week? Philadelphia Eagles. Got news for you. A shitload of people are watching that game. Pretty sure the following week, if not the following week, it might be in 2 weeks, he plays the Ravens. So, I mean, he's got Seattle, the Ravens, and the Eagles coming up. And obviously Eagles first, then the Ravens. But like, I'm not saying he's going to win the MVP, but he's a lot better than a lot of people on TV that I don't think watch every 49er game. And don't blame him. Like, there's no point in watching, if there are other good games on, watching Niners Bucks. I could have told you the outcome before kickoff. There was a reason it was a double-digit spread. The Niners were going to kick their ass, and they did. But if you watched him play, he is throwing bombs down the sideline. He averaged, at one point in time in the game, he was averaging almost 15 yards a pass completion. Like, this guy pushes the ball down the field. So many guys in the middle tier, the Derek Carrs, the Alex Smiths, we talk about being like dink and dunk guys. He's the opposite. He throws the ball down the field. So, like, I got news for you. Brock Purdy's just a good player. Right now, this version, Brock Purdy's good. Listen, we can talk shit about Dallas all we want. They're a weird team, right? They've played some good teams, and they haven't found a way to win, right? They played the 49ers, got destroyed, played the Eagles, lost, a lot of self-inflicted wounds. When they play bad teams, they destroy you. If they could ever figure out a way to bring whatever that swag, confidence, just mojo, like the Eagles, they can blow you out if they have to, but they have no problem playing an ugly-ass game and winning. Hell, like the Niners right now, they just blow you out. They don't really win these ugly games. No team wins ugly games like the Philadelphia Eagles right now. Dallas, no team blows you out quite like the Dallas Cowboys. They feel like Alabama when they're playing like Chattanooga, or Alabama when they're playing like Vanderbilt. And you're like, what's the spread there? 40? And they cover. That's the Cowboys when they play crappy teams. What else did we want to hit on? Got to give Josh Allen his flowers. 3 touchdowns after his offensive coordinator gets fired. It's always, I don't have inside information there into the dynamics of him and Ken Dorsey. He gave some quotes saying how much he owes to Ken Dorsey. Ken obviously was the quarterback coach before Daboll left. Those situations are always weird, right? It could just be, this is not, in the NBA, for example, the equivalent of Josh Allen would be like a top 7-8 player, right? It'd be a Giannis, a big-time player, a Max guy, a Kevin Durant. I know these guys have won championships, but you know what I mean. It'd be a guy with a lot of pull, a Luka, whoever. You name the superstar. When a guy like Ken Dorsey got fired in the middle of the season, you would say to yourself, well, he got him fired. But in football, Sean McDermott, and Josh Allen's quote was, Sean told me his logic and I agreed. And you're like, yeah, it's very true. It's a front office and coaching management style, right? So it's hard to truly know, but solid start for Joe Brady. Now it's Bills Eagles, pretty big game Sunday. And last but not least, I have no problem, and I've said this before. I remember going in 2014, and I watched J.J. Watt play live. I'm like, that's the best player in the NFL. It was week 2. He had just come off week 1 against the Redskins, where I think he had like 3 sacks, like 10 TFLs. One of the assistant coaches told me from the Raiders that game that one of like the dudes, it was Kyle Shanahan or someone had told him that they thought that was the best game they'd ever coached against, like seeing a player like that live dominate. And JJ finished second that year in MVP. Aaron Rodgers won. Now, granted, Aaron Rodgers that year was like 38-5, touchdown interception. I mean, Aaron Rodgers is a legitimate MVP candidate, had a fantastic year. Is there a lock quarterback that you're like, no doubt about it, has to win the MVP? Why can't another position win the MVP? I think Myles Garrett right now is the best player in the NFL. I mean, the Browns, if they win 12 games with the corpse of Deshaun Watson early on in the season, PJ Walker, and a rookie quarterback, and Myles Garrett has 20 plus sacks. And if you just watch him, like, you don't need to be some defensive guru to be like, what the hell is that? It's like if you watch Shaq in like 96 on the Orlando Magic, you'd be like, what's going on here? Honestly, it's like the clip of Shaq in the movie Blue Chips when Nick Nolte goes down to the bayou in New Orleans and it's one of my favorite sports movie scenes ever. And he goes into this gym, everyone's soaked in sweat. The gym or the rim is like wood, and there's a bunch of random dudes, and Shaq is dunking on guys, blocking shots. He looks like a mutant. And, they get him in. He hadn't passed the ACT or whatever. That's how Myles Garrett looks in the NFL right now. So to me, he's going to win the Defensive Player of the Year. And I think sometimes these voters are like, well, he won the Defensive Player of the Year. It's like Aaron Donald or J.J. Watt. Remember Aaron Donald some years would be like, that's the best player in the NFL. Just give the MVP to Myles Garrett. If none of these quarterbacks have 35, 40 touchdowns. Even if they do, like the eye test, even Jalen won the game tonight for the Eagles or played a huge part in winning the game. But he's not an MVP this year. He had a better season last year. Now, he's a winner. He knows what he's doing. But like, I'd have no problem giving it to Myles Garrett. Now let's go the bad. CJ Stroud and Jared Goff are having awesome years, right? They're just, if CJ Stroud gets the Houston Texans to the playoffs, that's an incredible accomplishment. I mean, I don't even know how you would describe football-wise what he did, because their team isn't that good. Now, they have clearly a good young coach. They do have some pieces, but the Houston Texans, even with a million injuries in the AFC to quarterbacks, should not be able to make the playoffs as a wild card. That should not happen. Like the Pittsburgh Steelers should not lose a wild card spot to the Houston Texans, but it's on the table right now. But he threw 3 picks yesterday. Jared Goff did as well. Now, both teams found ways to win, right? Both teams, the Texans a little less. I mean, they had the lead, but Kyler was doing some stuff. The Lions pulled that game out of their ass. Like, the Lions should not have won that. And like Myles Garrett, he's like 2 more games away from just like give the guy the MVP. Like, I don't see how you'd argue anything else. I think Dan Campbell, there was a stat yesterday on the Fox broadcast once the Lions won that game. They're not 12-0. They're not, 13-2. They're 8-2. 8-2. It's the best record for the franchise since 1962. That's the craziest stat I've heard all season. 8-2 is their best start since 1960. That sums up the Lions. If Dan Campbell, it's different in pro football than college. Like, if you were ever to go like 12-0 at Oregon State or at Kansas State or at some of these schools, you'd be like, it's the best coaching job I've ever seen. It's like when Jim Harbaugh went 11-1 at Stanford. Like, Jim Harbaugh went 11-1 at Stanford. One time when I was on radio, I used to have Bruce Feldman on. He said in all of his years covering college football, it's the most incredible accomplishment he's ever seen. Getting Stanford that good. I mean, they had John Elway in the mid-'80s. They went like 6-6. I mean, you don't go 11-1 at Stanford. And then they just kept rattling off with David Shaw. That's why people wanted to hire him for being an NFL coach. Dan Campbell, you win 13 games with the Lions. I don't give a shit when anyone else does. He's going to win the coach of the year. And the Bears were winning all game. I'll give the Bears some credit. They're playing really hard, and they easily could have won that game, but they lost. So it's an ugly loss because it was going to be difficult for you to lose, but you found a way to lose, and you almost found a way to lose by a lot more. Luckily, it was a safety and not a touchdown toward the end of the game with Justin Fields, but ultimately it's a positive. Like, if you're the Bears at this point in time, you do not want to win these games. It's pointless. But the best way to tank in the NFL, which doesn't exist, we talk about all the time, it's impossible, everyone's trying, is to just give the fans an incredible kind of ride and then lose, right? Because what is the difference of going 5-12 or 3-14, right? Maybe a field goal here or a fumble there. You might as well lose those games if it means getting a quarterback or just giving yourself more options. Let's get to the ugly. I watched the majority. I mean, basically every snap. I was dialed in. I had the sound on. I had one of the 4 boxes. but I had the sound on the Browns Steeler game. And that was just good old-fashioned AFC North football. Dude's getting crushed. Myles Garrett crushing people. TJ Watt crushing people. Highsmith crushing people. Love that style of football. Was difficult to watch Kenny Pickett. Like, I wasn't expecting much of DTR. So when he's struggling or not being able to move the offense up and down the field, no shit. He's, a rookie who I don't have high expectations for. But Kenny Pickett, first off with the Steelers, and I think any Steeler fan, anyone that gambled on the Steelers as I did, and anyone in fantasy football that has Warren on their fantasy football team, every time that Tomlin, Canada, who's ever in charge of the running back coach, takes Jalen Warren out of the game for Najee Harris, you want to put your fist through a wall. I had a decent amount of money on the Steelers, and I felt pretty good about it, especially when they tied at 10-10. I'm like, they're going to win this game. And they kept rotating their backs. Like, stop putting Najee Harrison. Jalen Warren, this guy looks like a star against one of the best defenses we've seen in recent memory. He's running all around. And they kept yanking him in and out of the game. And every time he was in the game, he'd have a 15-yard screen pass. He'd bust a fucking 9-yard run. And then you look up, he's coming off the field. I'm all for a guy getting a breather, but it was not your normal breather. It was like, oh, we're rotating. Stop rotating. Your quarterback stinks. Kenny Pickett was awful. I mean, was really bad. It looked a lot of times, it's one thing to miss passes, which he did. It's another thing. It's like part of Kenny Pickett has to be, I got to win with my mind. It was Mac Jones's thing. You can't make bad decisions. You have to be on the same page with your wide receivers. You have to master your playbook. And there were countless times where he'd throw the ball and no one would be there. It was like him and the wide receiver are not on the same page. It's like, this is, if I'm Tomlin, whether it's Canada, whether it's Pickett, whether it's what, this is a disaster. Now, ultimately, I've seen a lot of people dragging this guy like he's Zach Wilson. I think he's better than Zach Wilson. He's also playing easily the best defense in the league. So it was going to be difficult. He looked worse, though, than I imagined. Embarrassing performance. Now, what are you going to do? Bench him for Mitch Trubisky? You don't really have any other options, but that's a rough one because you draft this guy in the first round. It's one thing if Kenny Pickett was like, hey, we just found this guy in the fourth round. We'll figure it out. You draft this guy with his 20th overall pick. You drafted this guy to be, let's face it, your franchise quarterback. Newsflash, he's not. Obviously, a guy who's not their franchise. Zach Wilson is awful. He really is. He's a pitiful player. He's really, really bad. And sometimes, like, I say this all the time. I think sometimes it's like, you're just talking shit about NFL players. I have nothing but respect. It is so hard to make it to the NFL. It's not hard to become an NFL assistant coach. It's much more difficult to make an NFL roster, to play special teams for a year, let alone to get drafted high and become a starting quarterback. But then you got to play, and like, are you good enough? And I've seen countless players say this, and they're so right, that if he played any other position, right, if he was a guard, if he was a linebacker, if he was a kicker, whatever, he would never play. But because of where he was drafted and the position he plays, he has gotten probably more chances for a team that has a lot of talent than the overwhelming majority of players in the NFL, including a lot of quarterbacks, would have gotten. But it's become an embarrassment. Now, they benched him. I would say he's played his last snap for the Jets, but I thought that last year, after he blamed like everyone else except himself, and then all the other quarterbacks got injured. I mean, they can play Tim Boyle. They can play Vinny Testaverde. They can play, what's his name from Marshall, Pennington. It doesn't matter. Those guys are going to get hurt. I would imagine we see Zach Wilson again. I think in a perfect world, and here's the problem. Like, they don't have the balls to do this because he's their guy, right? And this is, I never understand this in football. People often say, like, you just said a couple weeks ago you like this player. Well, yeah, then I've watched the last month and he's not any good. Or you thought this team was going to be good. I did. And then they're not. So you got to change your opinions, right? If you buy a stock for $100 and you really like it and it goes to 150, you're going to ride that bad boy. If you buy the stock for $100 and you really like it, then all of a sudden 6 months later, you look at it as $20, you're probably not going to be as high on the company. So you're watching Zach Wilson, like, just cut the guy. Just cut him. Just remove him. You've already paid him. No one else is going to take him. He'll never have an ounce of trade value. Like, there's no team. The Eagles, the Chiefs, you name it, wouldn't trade him to be their 4th-string quarterback for a bag of footballs and a cheesesteak. No one will touch him. He has cost you so many games. I mean, it's gotten uglier these last couple weeks. It's really gotten ugly. Guy just runs into sacks. Washington. Division games are weird. I love the Bears last week. It's like they're getting 8.5 points, whatever, against the Lions. Division games get weird. It's why, like, if the Cardinals played the Niners this week, I'd be like, that 10 points is too much. Right? You would just Seattle. Like, Seattle, that game is going to be tight on Thursday night. Hell, Cowboys, Commanders. I look because it's like, oh, the Cowboys going to blow another team out. Well, division games, I could see it being a close game in the second half. Now, I like the Cowboys to win, but division games get weird. But to get worked by the Giants, to get destroyed by the Giants, who felt a lot like the Bears and the Panthers, like their season was over. And then you're looking up, because I was like, you know what? I'm not going to watch much of the Cowboy-Panther game. It's pointless. They're going to kill them. And at first, I did not have the Giant Commander game on. And then all of a sudden, I kind of checked the score, and I threw that bad boy on. The Giants kicked their ass. I mean, worked them. And I've seen several people, I think Mike Lombardi put this out there. I've met Ron a couple times. He's a Northern California guy, went to Cal. I've always rooted for him. When I met him, he couldn't have been any nicer. High character guy. People really, really like him. Old school football guy. Not a very good coach. He's got 3 winning seasons in 13 years. You know, again, good guy. Doesn't win a lot. Doesn't win a lot at all. I mean, it's pretty nuts, right? Because a couple of his playoff appearances have been when his team has been under 500. So it's like, it kind of counts, but it kind of shouldn't. I think it's fair to say that Riverboat Ron, or some people I think are calling him because he's no longer as aggressive with some of his play calling on 4th downs. Paddleboard Ron is coming down the home stretch here. Before we get out of here, I wanted to Morgan and Morgan. I wanted to give a little shout out here to a player that made it look easy. I'm a mob guy. I love mob shows. You give me, Netflix is just pumping me gaudy shows. I watched The Sopranos multiple times. I didn't watch it live when I was young. I've watched it multiple times since. Tony is my favorite character of all time. I've always was fascinated when I lived in Philadelphia about mob ties, about bodies getting tossed here. I just love everything about it. Fascinated. You give me a mob movie, I'm watching it. When they showed a couple weeks ago, the DeVito family from Jersey, like that is awesome. That is cool. Now, I'm not saying he's in the mob, but it kind of feels like that. I want him to be. Hopefully they have some ties. But then everyone's making fun of him because ultimately his kid, the family's there watching him, is just god-awful. You're like, this is really who, I don't know what their choices were, right? Daniel Jones tears ACL. Tyrod Taylor's got who knows what injury. He's been out forever. So you don't have a choice. Like, most 3rd-string quarterbacks ain't exactly, Eli or Joe Montana here. But to look up yesterday and see Tommy DeVito, now I get some guys were open. Not sure Washington knew what they were doing on defense. Go 18-26 for 3 touchdowns. I don't care if he never throws another touchdown in his life in the NFL. I picture, that some of those Soprano episodes when, like, Tony's riding with Chris. It's like Tony's the dad, Tommy is Chrissy, and them just cruising, telling stories about the time that he played in the NFL. I don't feel like this guy's going to play in the NFL for long, but I have been wrong before. That feels like a story that they're going to be sharing with all their buddies in Jersey and just for a long, long time. 3 touchdowns in a divisional game for the New York Giants when you're from Jersey. Like, how does it get any cooler than that? So my Morgan and Morgan player that made it look easy has to go to my main man, Tommy DeVito. So if you're ever injured, you can check out Morgan and Morgan. Their fee is free unless they win. For more information, go to forthepeople.com/John or dial pound law. That's pound 529 from your cell phone. That's FOR thepeople.com/John or pound law, pound 529 from your cell. This is a paid advertisement.